So here's the quick overview of everything that we did today in class. And our class is called Bat Waves, which is what happens when you combine the world of geophysics, where we study waves, with the world of environmental science, where we study critters. And you bring those together and you get our Bat Waves class. And we are going to be looking at sort of the motivation behind why we're studying bats today, why are bats cool, and how do we learn about them using acoustic signals. And so I'm going to start off by giving you a little tour. We're going to go to Bat Camp, where we're going to go out into the field and we're simulating what it would be like to actually do some bat research. And I've got 3 different locations that we could go to as part of our field work to observe bats. And so here's our first one. Is this beautiful open field. It's got lots of grass in it. Might this be a good habitat for bats? Or this here. Here's a forest with really closely spaced trees. It's very moist and wet. Would this be a good habitat for bats? Or here's another spot. This has got trees, but there's some more openings, and then there's this body of water in here that goes through. Would this be a good habitat for bat? And so if we were trying to figure out where to go to study our bats, which would be the best place to find and capture bats? And we're going to be spending more on this next week, but think about that. Pause me for a moment here as you try and figure out and think about what would be the advantages of each of these 3. And it turns out that actually this is a trick question, because all 3 of these are excellent bat habitat, places that bats would go and visit and eat. So we might find bats at all of these things. But if we're trying to capture them, we're trying to get all of our bats coming to one place. And they might be more likely to come to this creek here where they can get water to drink, and there might be a lot of aquatic insects to eat, and they might be funneled into this nice open corridor here, so they won't be flying through the trees. There's a nice spot there, and we'll talk a lot more about this as we think about how to set up acoustic surveys. But this winding creek is a great place for us to go, and so the first thing that we're going to do if we're going to try and catch bats is we can use these nets. We can walk across the water with them. You can visit in this picture on the right. I'm not sure if you can see the net. Well, that's part of the point, is because the net is actually up, but you can't see it. It's really hard to see. That's because these are called mist nets, and they're so thin they're like mist, and they're designed to be hard to see because you want the bat to be caught by surprise so that it flies into it without knowing it's there. So it has to be not only invisible to our eyes and their eyes, but it also has to be invisible to their echolocation. So it has to be very thin, and we can learn more about how thin and how you make things invisible. And just to give you another picture of this, here's a person who's working on extracting an organism from a mist net. I think it's a bird in this case. But you can see how it's very hard to even notice the net because of the way the camera is focused. So obviously this is exactly what we want. We want it so that it's really hard to see that net, so that bats will get caught in the net. And here's a picture of what it might look like as we go there, and we're going to have to untangle the bats. And I can show you that here as a short video clip.
You can find them just about anywhere. From Warren to West Greenwich.
You have to be very patient. You have to get all of these little bits of net around and off so the bat is tangled up in them, and you can hear it clicking there. Huh. I don't think it likes it. It's telling you that. But you eventually do that, and after some time you are able to get the bat out and have it in your hands ready to investigate. And in class, we each adopted a bat, and I'm going to give you a PDF where you're going to be able to look through the bat adoptions, and you would have a picture of a very cute bat, like, say, this one. And this is the bat that you captured and you're now holding in your hands, and this is going to be the one that we're going to be studying, and you're going to be looking at data for this bat throughout our time. Now, the first thing we need to do is figure out a little bit about this bat and figure out what type of bat it is, and one of the ways to do that is by measuring its forearm length. And you might think, well, forearm, where is the forearm of a bat? Well, this is the picture that you're going to be getting here, and in class we actually printed these out true size so that they were actually the size of an actual bat. But this is a bat's wing. They have shoulders just like we do. They have upper arms just like we do. Look at that bicep. And they have a forearm that comes to a wrist, and then they have, let's count the number of fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, oh, and a thumb, 5. They have 5 fingers. And you can see that most of their wing here consists of their hand. The webbing is in between their fingers, which is why We call bats the order of within their taxonomy. The order is Chiroptera. Which means hand wing. Chiro, like chiropractor, they use their hands to adjust you, and ptera, like a pterodactyl, that means wing. And so we are looking at the hand wing order of mammals, and they have the exact same bones as we do in our arms, as a bird does in its arms. In fact, most vertebrates, dinosaurs, birds, amphibians, everybody has the same set of bones. One upper arm, these two smaller bones in the forearm, and then wrists and fingers and all the different carpal little bones there. And it's just how big each one is dependent upon what that person or animal needs to do. So this is our hand wings. And you're going to be looking at your bat and measuring its forearm. And we have a table here of some common bats that are indicated by a 4-letter code, which is the first 2 letters of their genus and the first 2 letters of their species. So like ANPA is the Anthrazoas pallidus. And these are all bats that we have here in California. Not all of the bats that we have in California, so there's a couple of them missing on here. But let's say that we take a look at our measurements. And your measurement might be over here, and you might get an answer like, well, for Ginger, your adopted bat, let's see. She has a forearm that's about 35 millimeters long, and so we need to find what bat could that be. Well, could she be a pallid bat? Well, pallid bats typically have forearm lengths that are in the 48 to 60 range, so probably not. And we can look for other bats. There's a lot of bats that have the range, that fall in the range of mid 30s. Probably not this mica, the Myotis californicus. Probably not that, because yes, her wing's a little bit bigger than the big, is at the big range of that. And likewise, this other one here, the Myotis ciliabrum, too big for that. But ooh, maybe in this range here, maybe a little bit small for Myotis ovotis. Right in the middle of this range. So you can start seeing that we can use the forearm length as one key characteristic that will help us tell what bat species it is. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to look at the wing of your bat through a very bright light, like holding it up like this, such that your neighbor who's got their headlamp can shine it so you can get a really good look. And this is kind of the view, but here is a beautiful camera picture of what you will see if you actually do that. And you can see again, there's the forearm, the wrist, and all of our thumb and 4 other fingers. And what else do you notice? Take a look, pause me, and admire. Well, maybe you noticed some knuckles, like right here and right here. Think about your own hand, look down at it and see how many knuckles you've got. Well, so you got kind of 2 little joints in your fingers, so do the bats. And this one here, right at this joint here, you can see there's this little white space in there. A bat, as it grows up, its finger joints and its knuckles basically fuse together to make the wing a little bit more sturdy and robust. But this one here, it is not yet fused together. So what does that tell us? We can look at this and we can determine that this is a young bat. Folks might also be noticing these beautiful veins coming in here, which carry blood. And the only reason to carry blood through veins is if you need to be able to do something. So, our hair, no veins in that. Our fingernails, no veins in that. But our skin does have veins, and that's because our skin can feel things. And so there are nerve cells in there. And so this membrane here is all made out of skin. And it has sensational, nerve sensations in it, such that as it's flying through the air, it can feel the wind rushing over it. Imagine the beautiful sensations it must feel. But that's the dark things going through here are the veins. There's some other interesting features that are there that go like this here as I trace them out with my mouse. Now, those are not wrinkles. Wrinkles look like the thing over on the left side. These are something different. And one of the things that we know is that if there's blood, you're doing stuff, and we said there's nerve cells, but what else do you need blood to pump and do? You need it to activate muscles. And these are actually individual muscle fibers here, or bundles of muscle fibers that allow the bat to actually contract its wing to change its shape as it's flying. So it can actually actively adjust its wing shape while it's in flight, and it does that through these muscles. And of course, it needs blood to do that. These are not the muscles that flap the wings and make it have power, but they are able to hold their hand in a certain shape so that they can get it so that they can fly most efficiently in different conditions. The other thing, now that we've got our bat, we've looked at its wing, our bat might have a band on it, and that's pretty cool because you're able to actually track bats as they are recaptured from one time to the next. And so this bat might have been caught, released, with a band on it, and then we catch it again. We look at the little serial number, and we can look it up in a registry and find out, hey, this bat was released in, I don't know, maybe 2022. So how old is it now? It's got to be at least 3 years old because we know it was banded 3 years ago, and so we can start seeing how old bats are. And you might find a bat like this. These tiny little brown bats like this one have been banded here in North America, and they've found bats that were banded 34 years ago, and so that means they're at least 34 years old. And in Europe, they found ones that are up to 41, I think, is the record. And so imagine this. It's very. There's so many bats out there, and it's very hard to catch them. And so it's to be able to come back and find the exact same bat again, 34 or 40 years later. That's pretty impressive, and it tells you that they're bats that are at least that old. Now, I would not have expected bats to be that old. People often think of bats as kind of like flying mice. They're definitely not. 90% of mice die off within 9 months in the wild. And so these are very long-lived creatures, and with that age comes maturity. It's a sign of a fair amount of intelligence that they have, and so really amazing. One of the most amazing facts about bats that I hadn't realized before was just how long-lived they can be. Now, the next thing that we're going to do as part of our bat research here is we are going to we'd like to know where this bat's going to go next. And so we can attach a little radio transmitter backpack. And this one here has a little string that ties around the bat's neck, and the string will break off at some point so that when the batteries die, this thing's not going to be any use, and then it won't trouble the bat for very long. But for maybe a week or two, we can get data about where that bat is going. Now, these are not GPS transmitters. Those have only come along really recently to be small enough to actually fly. But radio transmitters just send out a little beeping signal. And so if you're listening on a radio, if you're close by, you can hear the beep. And if you're not close by, you don't hear the beep. So you do this, you put these little sensors on there, and let the bat release out into the wild, like Naomi's doing there. And then you go around with a very special antenna. You point it in a certain direction, and if you hear the beep, that tells you that the bat must be in that direction. Now, bats can travel really long distances. You can sit there with your little antenna and point it in every direction around you and say, from where you released it, and say, I don't see it anywhere. And it's because it's gone out of range. And that's when you actually might need to pull out your airplane and stick that antenna on the airplane and start flying around until you hear the beeping for miles and miles, and you might be able to go down to the forest in the place that you've identified it's in that general area. Or you can put up permanent little detectors that have 3 different antennas, and they point in different directions, and so you can, as a bat flies by, you can see which direction it came from, and that can help you track them down and monitor where and when they're coming and how often they're coming, and get data about that. And eventually you might make it back to your bat's roost. And you point it up and you're like, I'm definitely there. And so we have this question, where does your bat roost? There's no place like home. And so now let's take a look at Ginger's bat roost. And so I'm going to show you that. Here is Ginger right here. She lives in this beautiful forest, and this is look at where she's sleeping. She's hanging on by 1 foot, it looks like, to this tree. And we did this for your own bat, but then we also shared with other people about their bats. So here is another bat's roost, another tree. Oh, look at this one. This one's also in a tree, a palm tree. Let's try a different spot. This one here, you can see, is in a cave. This bat lives in a little crevice in between 2 rocks. Here's some bats that live in an old barn. Ooh, these bats also live in the crevice, in a crevice. Here's a bat that lives in a different type of crevice. This one's underneath some tree bark. Ooh, here's another one that's crawling out of a crevice right here on the side of a hillside. So these are all different places that bats live. And you'll notice that most of these bats do not live in caves. In fact, most bats in California do not live in caves. So if you have that as a conception about what sort of places to look for bats, you should not be looking in caves for most of our bats. They are, many of them are tree dwellers or crevice dwellers. And so we have this fun question that we're going to be answering over the course of the semester, or trying to at least. Where do CSUN's bats live? And I don't know if we're going to be able to find the answer, but we're going to track them down as best we can. All right, we're at our roost. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put down a plastic sheet. And the reason for that is because then we'll be able to, as the bat sits there and it's over the course of the day, it's going to poop, and we can catch its fresh poop and then collect it and analyze it. Because what can we see by looking at the poop? We can see what it has eaten. And we can examine it visually, looking for fragments of things that were undigested, like maybe there's some moth wings or some fly wings that didn't have any nutritional value and ended up in the bat's poop, so we know that it ate flies or moths. But we can get even more sophisticated than that by putting that sample into a DNA sequencer and comparing it against sort of, it's called the barcode of life, a library of DNA of different organisms. And so even if there's little fragments of DNA that are left over in that poop, we can determine the exact, in some cases, the exact species that bat has eaten in the last day or two, and get a whole list of them. And so there's a bunch of different things that bats eat. And so we're going to take a look here. You're going to examine your fecal DNA. So we'll look at Ginger's poop and see what she has eaten and see what patterns she notices. And now I have this caveat that most of the bats, the graphics that I'm going to show you, are a small subset of the number of prey species that they eat. I was just looking at good pictures so we could get a sense of the variety. And that these results for what you find in the poop will vary based upon a bat's age, they've seen in some studies, by the day, the season, and even two bats of the same species that are the same age, that are they're different individuals, they might have different individual feeding preferences. Like, do you like cilantro? Well, some of you do, some of you don't. Same thing with bats. Some of them like cilantro more than others, or the equivalent of bat cuisine. So what is bat cuisine? You're going to look at your thing, and as you look at your diet from the fecal data, I want you to sort of think about some patterns and categories you can start placing things into. Does this look like a carnivore, an herbivore, or an omnivore? Does it eat things that are found flying through the air, crawling around on the land, or maybe near or swimming in the sea, or other water bodies? We'll just call it sea. And just the size, small, medium, large. What's your sense? So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at Ginger's data. And here is her diet. You can see she eats some pretty big size moths there, all the way down to some tiny little fruit flies and flying ants, some beetles, some really small moths. She's got a fairly varied diet. But we then asked people to compare. You're supposed to compare now what's for dinner by talking to the bat next door. And so let's take a look at these bats here that live in the cave. What do they eat? Well, they have a more consistent pattern here. They are all, it seems like, eating kind of medium-sized moths is this type of bat. So this is a medium-sized moth eater. Let's try a different one. Ooh, this one here has a whole bunch of different types of ground beetles, beetles that crawl on the ground, along with some things that that fly through the air, like a mayfly or a mosquito. Ants, may beetles fly. Cucumber beetles crawl along and live on plants. Elm boring beetles live on trees. So quite a range of beetle-like things for this particular bat. This bat has another bunch of beetles and flying things. This one here, oh, it's got bigger stuff, it looks like. And included in that is, oh, interesting, there's the water boatmen. Now, water boatmen live in the water and they swim through the water for most of their lives. So that's interesting. Or this bat here, oh, look, it's cute, isn't it? Well, look what it eats. It eats all sorts of things, including a number of things that definitely do not fly, that live on the ground. So a wide range of things are eaten by different types of bats. But if we start thinking about our categories here, herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, looks to me like all of our bats that we've captured here in our Southern California region, they seem to be eating insects. That makes them carnivores. And so we can conclude from this that almost all bats in California are insectivores. And in fact, just one little brown bat can catch like 1,200 mosquito-sized insects in an hour. That's a lot of food to eat. And then, it's not just mosquito-type things that are flying. Remember, a lot of these are eating other pests. So bats eat bark beetles and wood borers, and that's one of the main reasons that our forests are dying off, is because the drought makes them susceptible to beetles, which then kill the trees, which makes great fuel for wildfires in forest regions. The wildfires that we're experiencing are not typically caused by this down here in our part of LA, but this is a problem throughout the Sierra Nevada mountains. But you've got yummy little beetles for the bats come along, and they will chomp on those beetles, helping patrol the forest, helping reduce wildfire risk. So this adds up quite a bit. Like there is a colony of bats that lives out near Sacramento. They live in this freeway structure, actually in the crevices of the freeway structure. And there are more than 250,000 bats that fly out every night to go out and hunt. They're Mexican free-tail bats, that's the species. And those bats typically are about 12 grams in mass, which is pretty light, but there are a lot of them. And they eat a lot. A typical bat will consume about 1/3 of its body weight each night in insect prey. And if they're pregnant, they'll eat even more, or nursing as well. So lots and lots of consumption. So I had students calculate out, how much does this equal when you have 250,000 bats eating 1/3 of their weight? How many pounds is that? What does that relate to in real world things? So pause me, do that calculation real fast. You should have gotten an answer close to 2,200 pounds per day. There's a 250,000 of them. They eat about 4 grams or 0.004 kilograms. That adds up to 1,000 kilograms, which is 2,200 pounds, which is approximately equivalent to 8,000 quarter-pound hamburgers, which is more meat than the average McDonald's store sells in 2 weeks. So it would take 2 weeks for a McDonald's to flip up enough burgers to feed that colony what it eats each and every night. So that adds up a lot of pests being eaten. How many? Well, let's take a look at this experimental cornfield. They've planted some corn plants. Here it is during the daytime. They have these cool nets that they've put up where they can retract them. And so during the day, they retract the nets. And then as it gets towards evening time, they close the nets so that all 4 sides of the cornfield are closed up, and the 4 sides of the roof. And that means that no bats can get in. Pests can get in, moths can get in, but bats are kept out. And so what happens? Let's take a look at this graph. You might need to pause it to get a sense of things. They're looking at over the course of several months here on the x-axis. And on the first graph, you're looking at the number of larvae that were found on each corn plant on average. And so the enclosure means that was no bats, and the control is where bats are able to freely patrol. And you can see that when you have bats around, there are fewer pests on the corn. Makes sense. And what does that do to the corn? Well, on this graph over here, we're looking at damaged kernels per ear, and the blue is the no bats, and when you have no bats, you've got more damage to your corn kernels. And so that adds up, it turns out, to something like in California alone, $1.3 billion a year in agricultural losses from insect pests that bats save. And we're going to be reading this as for your homework, a science paper on bat benefits. And so you'll look at that, and it's pretty cool. So far, we've only been looking at bats from California. Let's look at bats around the world real fast. These are our California bats that look like this on the left. They're eating insects, but check out this bat. If you happen to see this one in Indonesia, you might see that it eats something like this. This is called a pawpaw fruit. The internet tells me they're very tasty. I've never had one, but maybe you have. I think this is a ficus, and it has these little fruits that bats enjoy. This one here I've heard of before. It's called a durian. I've never had one, but apparently they're orangutans' favorite food, and they're also very delicious in Southeast Asia. And these are one of my favorites. These are cashews, and this is how they grow on the tree. And this bat will eat all of these different things. And so we started to see that there appear to be some differences in bats. If we look at this graph here, this is showing where you will find bats around the world. And let's just first look at the colors on the continents, because there's a couple color scales going on. So ignore the bars for a moment and just look at the colors on the continents. That goes with this color scale over here and tells you the number of different species. So if you put out some mist nets here in this northern part of South America trying to capture bats, you might find as many as 120 different types of bats in that spot. Where we are, that number is in the yellow here. It's much smaller. We've got 27 different types of bats in California, at least that they say. And you can see the bats occur on all continents except Antarctica, none there. There's some other places you can see there are also no bats, up here in the Himalayas and here up in northern Siberia. Now, bats do exist in the northern part of Scandinavia, so they can handle cold just fine. They can live north of the Arctic Circle. Cold's not a problem. The reason they don't live in Antarctica is because there's nothing for them to eat. And so they go where there's food, and these tropical areas here have the most type of food, and you get the most diversity of bat species. Now, the other color scale on here is what these types of bats are eating. So we said that in California, most of our bats eat insects, but there are a few other types that eat fruit, nectar, or other meat. In Europe, they're all insect eaters. There are no other types of bats in Europe. But if you go down to Central America and South America, you can start seeing that a large fraction of the types of bats there eat fruit. Some of them eat nectar, and some of them eat other meat like fish that they'll catch, frogs, and even the vampire bat, which sucks the blood, or at least licks the blood up of mammals. So lots of different varieties here, and you'll find lots of fruit-eating bats in some parts of the world, which kind of brings us to this interesting dichotomy in the bat world. And there are two suborders within the order Chiroptera, and they actually have these official names of yin bats and yang bats. That's like Yinochiroptera and Yangochiroptera, or something along those lines, are the names of these suborders. That's the official name. And the yang bats are the ones that we have. They have this complex echolocation that we're going to learn about. They're usually smaller. They're usually insectivores. And there's more than 1,000 different types of yang bats. Another category of them, the suborder, is yin bats, which have weak echolocation. Some of them don't echolocate at all because many of them are big and eat fruit. Frugivore means eat fruit. And what does it mean if you're eating fruit? Do you need to go out at night? No, you want to go out in the daytime when you can find fruit. And do you need to have echolocation? It doesn't really help you that much. And so that's why they have weaker echolocation. And there are more than 400 species of these yin bats, and they occur all over the world, but not mostly in the southern hemisphere. Total of 1,400 species of bats worldwide, and they're particularly diverse in areas with the most biodiversity. And there are so many different types of bats. They are really, one of the most common types of mammals that there are. So if you picture a mammal, well, maybe you pictured a fuzzy bear or something like that, but 1 out of 4 times that you picture a mammal, it should be a bat, because 1 out of 4 species are bats. And I can show you that by flipping back and forth between these two pictures. One of them shows mammal richness, and one of them shows bat richness. And the color scale changes a little bit. So there are 212 species of mammals that you might find in this rich tropical forest here. And of those 212, 120 of them are bats. So bats are really diverse. There's all sorts of different little niches that they have, and 1/4 of all mammal species are bats. This graphic here kind of hides what goes on in North America. We don't have nearly as many bats diversity as they do in South America, but if we sort of zoom in and change our color scale, you can see the species richness here. We happen to live in the hot zone, in this area with the most diverse set of bats in the US. And so it's a great place to be. It's a great place to study bats. we spent a bunch of time looking at our own local bats, and I wanted to now talk a little bit more about some of those herbivore bats, the ones that drink nectar to start off with, and they are set up here. There, you can take a look at this bat. Look at what happens when these bats go down. They dig into these flowers trying to get that juicy, delicious, sweet nectar. They can be covered in pollen, and that makes them a really good pollinator. And this picture here, it's from the National Park Service, but I was like, that must be like a staged photo or something where they dusted pollen off it. They can't possibly get that much on them. But then I found this picture here, and it turns out that they'll sometimes go deep down into that and crawl in there and then crawl their way out, and they can indeed get totally covered in pollen. Now, the bat folks really talk about how important bats are for pollinating plants, and I want to put that in perspective. They are indeed important, but globally here, if we look at what types of what are the big pollinators in the world? The vast majority of plants are pollinated by insects, or most pollination occurs by insects. The next is the green here is by birds. They're a nice chunk, and bats are there with maybe 3 to 5% of plants that they serve to pollinate. But these are pretty important ones, and within the tropical timber world, eucalyptus is often pollinated by bats, balsa wood, and other timber. Some of my favorite tropical fruits like mangoes, guavas, jackfruits, and wild bananas that we're going to come back to in a minute. And durian, we talked about those. They're orangutang's favorite food. And agave, the source of tequila, pollinated primarily by bats in the wild. So we would not have tequila without bats. Now, bananas are pretty crazy. I didn't know this, that if you eat a banana, you don't usually have to chew around the seeds, because the bananas that we eat in America are primarily bred so that they have tiny, tiny seeds. But if you go out into the wild, you can find bananas with all sorts of different huge seeds in them. And so wild bananas look like this, and a good portion of wild bananas have these downward-facing flowers, and they're pollinated almost entirely by bats. Some of them open only at night. They have tiny little, little flowers that are not very pretty, because bats don't need pretty flowers, because they come in with their echolocation. So they're pretty in ultrasound, but not pretty visually for us. You can't see the colors very well at night anyways. And so we have bats to thank for bananas, even though our current variety of banana that we eat is reproduced by cloning of propagating of branches and things like that. We wouldn't have gotten to that stage without the rich diversity of bananas and the pollination that bats served for that purpose. So thank you, bats, for bananas. And this is kind of what happens, is that these bats really do serve to improve genetic diversity. They do a great job of promoting genetic diversity because they have so much pollen. They carry so many different genetic options at one time, and then they can travel much further distances than a lot of other pollinators like insects. And so that helps it so that you can make it so that two different plants don't have to reproduce with their siblings. They can reproduce with distant plants that are genetically different from them, and you get these wonderful, robust combinations and lead to great diversity in plant life. Once those fruits are pollinated and grow, bats love to come in and eat the seeds. They'll take off and they will grab fruits. And many folks argue that bats can be more effective at seed dispersal than birds for a couple reasons. That birds like to stay longer at the tree. They'll sit there and they'll peck and drop things down right at the tree, and that doesn't transport the seed very far. And then when they do end up eating seeds and pooping them out, they often poop while they're perched on a tree. And so where does that seed fall? At the base of an existing tree. Again, not a great place to plant a new one. Bats are more likely to grab and go, and when they do poop, they will defecate or spit out seeds in flight. So whatever is beneath them might have seeds raining down, and that can be a good source of new pioneer species, particularly in secondary succession in rainforests. And of course, the other thing is that many bats are pretty big seed eaters, and so they can carry really big seeds. And some of the tropical fruits, like say a mango, for example, is hard for a lot of birds to carry away, and yet a large bat can. So that was fun. This class, however, will do none of those things. We will not be capturing bats in nests. We will not be visiting a place where there are bats that drink nectar. We will not be capturing bat poop, most likely, although it's a pretty easy analysis. We could do that here at CSUN. We do not have permission to do radio tracking. This is a bat that, or a class where we're doing different things with bats. So what can we do to study them? We can listen to them. Of course, you know that bats echolocate, and that is the source of our class. We are going to set out microphones like this. This is located close to where that mist net was set up in the beginning of our study, but you can also set them up other places. Like, for example, this is my office where I am sitting right now on the second floor of Live Oak, and I stick a microphone out my window pretty often. You can see it from the ground there. And I can record bats out my window here on the CSUN campus. In fact, I've recorded, I think, 7 different species here on campus. And when you do, you get data like this. And next time we get together, we are going to be examining the data and trying to learn how to use it. So join us then.